Shh. I'll talk in a second, just enjoy the music. Okay, so in 1991 we got Street Fighter II and it was incredible. I think I went over that enough in the last video and we will most certainly talk about it in the future. In 1992 we got Mortal Kombat and it was the opposite side of a coin that would persist to today, 25 years later. But a 1993 Sega Genesis exclusive barely got any attention beyond its release despite feverish fan support. That game was Eternal Champions, an American-produced passion project by former Sega of America employee Michael Latham. A man who believed a fighting game shouldn't skimp on story, Latham had plans for 3 separate games to spin the full tale, and while that never came to fruition, the cultural impact of the game resonated more than Sega's treatment of it would have you think. Legendary hip-hop group Bone Thugs and Harmony sampled the song you're listening to right now for their 1995 song entitled, you guessed it, Eternal. But when Sega of Japan freaked out and seized control, the project was basically canned in favor of Virtua Fighter. Maybe this is subconsciously why I've never given a shit about Virtua Fighter. For my money, Eternal Champions was the most interesting of the 3 fighting franchises in prominence at the time. Street Fighter had various martial artists the world over, Mortal Kombat had much of the same with insane special moves, but Eternal Champions had incredibly diverse characters from across time, competing in the afterlife for a chance at a return to life and redemption. By the time I got around to this game circa 1996, I was swiftly edging toward the baby bat phase of gothdom, and this game encouraged that transition rather smoothly. It had tragedy, incredibly dark themes, the gore of Mortal Kombat, and a general air of mystery surrounding it. But enough intro, let's get to the story of the game and the characters. This otherworldly entity known as the Eternal Champion has figured out that humanity is on the brink of extinction thanks to the untimely deaths of several key individuals throughout history. The champion uses his power to capture them all just before the moment of their deaths and forces them to fight, with the winner miraculously surviving their predicaments to help forward humanity's cause, while the rest return to their fate. So let's get started with Slash. He's the most prominent character on the cover, the caveman most people think about when they see the game in their heads. He had a similar look to Street Fighter's Blanka, and man, it was the early 90s. Cavemen were fucking cool. He certainly rivaled the ninja assassin Shadow for being the face of the franchise, and she featured in a lot of promotional material, was most prominent on the title screen, and was the main character in one of the 2 spin-offs. So, he seemed like as good a place as any to start. Slash was like the CM Punk of cavemen. He challenged the views of his elders, had some revolutionary ideas about fairness, and he wasn't afraid to show it. Of course, as often happens when dealing with a brutish majority who doesn't want to budge, the elders didn't take kindly to this, and Slash was bound and stoned to death for his radicalism. Until the Eternal Champion intervened. Finish the game with Slash and watch him break free, fight off his people and bring them the glory of fire using techniques learned from the tournament and the warlock Xavier in particular. This knowledge and ability sees Slash chosen as the new sole leader of his people, and he brings prehistoric man into the future with peace instead of war. Slash's fighting style is described as pain. Predating organized martial arts, Slash fights dirty and swings a spiked club at his enemies. It's about winning, not the grace, style, and theory of the more technical arts. It probably also helps that he's some manner of Neanderthal, stockier and stronger than your average human. I wasn't a big Slash player when I was a kid. His moves felt too slow, short range, and easy to dodge, even if he did hit really hard. Now, Shadow Yamato, on the other hand. I was super young when I played Eternal Champions. We're talking 12 or 13 maybe. I didn't really do the lusting after video game characters thing. Not that I do that too much today anyhow. But boy did I have myself a little crush on Shadow. Not sure if it was the long jet black hair, the domino mask, those thighs, or just the tragedy of her backstory, but I was smitten. It was a simple story. Yakuza assassin learns that failure means her own death. This conflict means she can't bring herself to kill others, so she decides to go straight and expose her masters. Only they got to her first. If Shadow is your character of choice when you defeat the game, you find out she evaded her assassination attempt and discovered it was her boss who arranged it, instead causing him to fall the 101 stories to his death. Shadow goes into protective custody, testifies, and the world is a better place. Or she gets recruited into the terrible spin-off game, The Experts. Shadow's hybrid style of taijutsu and ninjutsu is a fancy way of saying she's a ninja who does a lot of kicks. Her rolling front kick was a favorite of mine, and if I had ever managed to figure out how to abuse that teleport reliably, I probably would have liked that too. There are only 2 females in this iteration of Eternal Champions. The other is Jenna Max, a name so 90s it has 2 X's in it. Cousin of Tsar Nicholas II, Jenna abandoned the noble life to become a beloved Russian circus acrobat, whose tightrope and safety net were sabotaged by a Chinese boxer revolutionary. I suppose that's what you get for sticking your nose into China's business when they have a movement going on to get rid of all foreigners in their country. If she survives the tournament, she escapes the incident with fluidity and grace. The saboteur is killed, and while the Boxer Rebellion and Russia's own civil war still occur, Jenna starts an underground freedom fighter movement that plants the seeds for both governments to foster peace worldwide. It's a very butterfly effect story, because while the survival of one famous acrobat probably wouldn't normally lead to such dramatic, sweeping change, even if she is the Tsar's cousin, the fallout had unpredictable and far-reaching consequences. Her fighting style is described as a combination of Savat and Pencak Silat, which I'm probably butchering. The latter I can see a little more, but Savat is known for direct and aggressive strikes, whereas Jenna has a more agile style befitting her training as an acrobat. I mean, I could be wrong. This could be classic Savat. I'm not a martial arts expert, and I'm told they had one on staff, so what the hell do I know? Jenna also has some sort of telekinesis, which I think would bear mentioning somewhere in her backstory or something, but... no? Let's move on from Jenna to Rax Coswell, for no other reason than my preteen mind thought they might be related somehow. They aren't. Rax stands for Robotic Artificial Exoskeleton, which is interesting because... does this mean Rax is his nickname and Coswell is his first name? Is it his last name and his first name was just something else? Did he just happen to also have the first name Rax before undergoing cyborg surgery? Rax is a kickboxer from the year 2345, where martial arts tournaments gave way to cyber fighting, which honestly just sounds like a competing franchise to Eternal Champions. Like many young, impressionable people in the entertainment industry, Rax elected to get implants to give him an edge on the competition. And it worked. Unfortunately, ordinary greed didn't see itself out the door along with ordinary martial arts, and Rax's manager implanted a virus in his system to cause it to shut down during his championship match, so he could collect the winnings by betting against it. If you steer Rax to ultimate victory, he shoots his manager with a phaser set to stun, shorting out the transmitter for the virus in the process. He takes his time to finish kicking the shit out of his opponent, then gets the virus removed from his systems. The manager is jailed for attempted murder, cyber fighting is outlawed, and the public turns to more wholesome forms of competition, like pro wrestling and the X Games. This is a good ending for humanity, I suppose. No return to the barbarism of Roman Colosseums and such, but here's Rax with his body replaced by expensive tech and nothing to do with it. Kinda sucks for him, is all I'm saying. The sequel expands on this a bit. It says Rax goes back to school to study robotics and becomes a figurehead for cyborg rights in a world where they've become reviled for being a symbol of corruption. And that's nice, but... unlike a lot of the other endings, he doesn't just suddenly cause world peace. More realistic, probably, but still. Poor Rax. Rax is described as Muay Thai fighter, and you can see it in his attacks. Very well animated, very fluid. He's also part robot, so he shoots lasers and stuff. If this were any other game, I'd assume Rax was the cover star and main character in the vein of Ryu and Liu Kang. He's got a great look, an awesome 80s bandana, and he just wants to be the best fighter. But nope, he didn't even get a spin-off game. Unlike our next character, Larson Tyler. Larson is the visual embodiment of a 20s gangster with a heart of gold, pulling heists and other robberies for an evil crime boss, but refusing to kill for any reason. The Don tells him to plant false evidence in a hospital room to set up a rival crime boss, but Larson shows up and finds out the target is actually the Chicago police chief visiting sick children in the hospital, and the package is a bomb. Everything goes up in a ball of flame if you don't play through Larson's story, you monster, and give the gangster a chance to ditch the bomb and look like a hero. The chief recruits him into a secret government task force, and Larson not only gets his revenge on his former boss, but takes down all major organized crime families and cartels. Larson has a grappling hook and knuckle dusters, but his style is referred to as praying mantis kung fu. The stance is pretty good, but most of his moves are more reminiscent of very basic karate or taekwondo, with a little bit of American boxing thrown in there for good measure. Ironically, that would have made more sense for his character to have as well, given his origins in 1920 Chicago. But I would have rather had some awesome, really accurate Tanglan Quan instead. That shit looks sick. Speaking of my pet favorite martial arts, let's take a look at Trident. A genetically engineered gladiator and hero to the people of Atlantis, named for the weapon that replaced his right hand after a fight with a shark. Trident was chosen to battle the Romans for land rights on the surface. One Roman gladiator didn't much like the idea of sharing the same air as scary fish people, so he crushed Trident with a pillar. Because if Romans knew anything, it was gladiating and sweet pillars. If you defeat the Eternal Champion and return to life, Trident escapes the pillar at the last second and bests his opponent in combat, but refuses to kill him. He preaches to both peoples the error of their ways, but only the Atlanteans listen. Trident is forced to kill his opponent in self-defense, and he and his people return to live under the sea in a peaceful utopia, where genetic engineering has rendered them immortal. Despite not having anything to say beyond croaking the word freak when you mash the taunt button, I projected a lot of personality onto Trident. I saw him as a character not unlike Nightcrawler from the X-Men, or perhaps Star Trek's Spock. He had a logic to him, and he didn't want to run into rash decisions, but he also was aware of what he was. He wasn't my favorite character in the game, but he was up there. I also have to applaud the designers on nailing his capoeira as well as they did for the 16-bit era. He's no Eddie Gordo, but you can definitely see the inspiration in more of Trident's moves and poses than you can, say, Blanca from Street Fighter, who also professes to use the style. Don't ask me how a pre-Christian fishman learned a 16th century martial art, though. Let's move on from one of my favorite characters to probably my least favorite, Jonathan Blade. A loose cannon cop with a bad attitude, Blade was dismissed from his position after nearly beating a guy to death and became a bounty hunter in his homeland of Syria. His end came in pursuit of a mad scientist who was threatening to destroy the human race with a lethal toxin as a protest against bioengineering. Blade took the job to retrieve the toxin with the caveat that the government wouldn't interfere. He tracked the scientist down and talked him into giving up his cause, but the Syrian government made their move and gunned down both men in a hail of laser fire. The last thing he saw was the broken vial containing the toxin a few feet in front of him on the pavement. Unless you beat the game with him. Using techniques he learned from the tournament, Blade stunned the agents with his wrist lasers. But instead of turning over the scientist and a deadly toxin to a backstabbing government, he helped the scientist go into hiding, destroyed the toxin, and split the rest of his time between running from Syrian assassins and hunting bounties until the end of his days. Blade uses Kenpo, I guess? Looks more like Savat if you ask me, or Russian Sambo, but again, I'm not an expert. Blade has some obvious influences in Marvel's Vampire Hunter Blade, to whom he bears a striking resemblance and fondness for the color green, as well as some small nods and theming to the movie Blade Runner, which is also about an ex-cop turned bounty hunter who faces a moral quandary in what is supposed to be his last mission. All this combined with the Bret Hart shades and crosshair symbol should suggest a cool customer that's right up my alley, but Blade just falls way short for me. There's nothing I like about the weird animation to his normals, his lackluster special moves, and bodycon leotard thing. Even his sweet-ass Space Ghost power bands can't save him from being at the bottom of my list. Sorry, Blade. So, if Blade's my least favorite, who do I like the most? Well, as I mentioned before, Shadow and Trident made a good impression. Larson Tyler, even if his fighting style isn't really Mantis Kung Fu. But the final fighters that follow are definitely my number 2 and number 1. First comes Midnight. I mentioned at the top of the show this was the age where I was developing the most into my gothdom, right? Well, a white-haired savage vampire with bulging veins so impressive Vince McMahon would swoon and flesh missing from his hands, feet, and chest? Yes. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Yes, indeedy. Sign me the fuck up. Something else I like about Midnight is that he's not a traditional vampire. He was a London-born biochemist working for the CIA on loan from Interpol who was assigned with making bioweapons to win the Vietnam War. He comes up with this virus that brings its victims to the brink of death where they would remain waiting for the antidote, but when he finds out it's supposed to be introduced directly into Vietnam's major water supplies, he refuses and flees back to London. During his escape, Midnight falls into a chemical storage unit releasing the virus. The chemical combination changes the effects of the virus. Instead of hanging on the edge of death, Midnight becomes a living vampire. He goes into hiding to search for a cure, and in the meantime, the CIA decides to use the modified virus, not knowing the full extent of its new effects. Now a bunch of third world countries are overrun by vampires, and Midnight is racing against time to find a cure, his body wasting away because he refuses to drain the life force of another creature in order to sustain himself. Which he would have done had some dickhead not shot him through the chest with a magnesium stake. Even if you beat the game with him, Midnight is forced to fight said dickhead and all of his buddies, killing them in self-defense. At the end of his rope and thinking waste not want not, he drains their life forces, gathers up the remains of his lab, and flees to Scotland. Things are going groovy, research is going well, until a street kid with vampirism starts organizing the people of the night. What starts as a support group turns into a political movement, and eventually a terrorist cell bent on turning all of humanity into vampiric creatures. Midnight stands as the only line of defense between them, which sounds like a great pilot for a TV show. Anyone listening out there? Just give me, executive producer credit. Midnight uses Jeet Kune Do, which is basically just a great way to say he fights however the hell he wants, as a lot of the hallmarks of Bruce Lee's personal style are absent. But he does have a very unique array of moves, and he can turn into mist and fly. Damn it, he just looks badass. So, this might not be a favorites list, but I have saved the guy I think is the best for last, and by process of elimination, that can only be the alchemist Xavier Pendragon. The game says he uses Hapkido, but mostly the dude just hits people with a cool dragon stick. Let's get on with the plot. A humble scholar, Xavier stumbled upon a mysterious green compound that could be used to amazing ends, like as a clean renewable energy source. Unfortunately, he made the mistake of living in Salem in 1692. I don't know if Abigail Williams went pointing fingers at him specifically, but the church came knocking and strapped him to the stake, burning him for being a warlock and a devil worshipper. I mean, my suggestion would be maybe don't dress like a wizard and cast magic spells that turn people into gold, or shoot snakes out of your staff if you want to avoid being called a warlock, but whatever, I'm not here to judge Xavier, I'm here to talk about what happens if you beat the game with him, because it is pretty epic. Basically, Xavier comes back on the stake and gets the idea to tell his accusers that his equipment should be burned with him. They're gullible Puritans who can be swayed by the poorly aimed accusations of a bunch of preteens, and it's all evil Satan stuff to them, so they agree it's a great idea. Xavier uses his mysterious green MacGuffin of unlimited power to create an explosion that sucks both he and some random owl hundreds of years into the future. The Puritans take this weird green flash and his disappearance as a sign from God that the final warlock has been burned and all is well. I guess nobody gave a fuck about the owl. So now Xavier and this owl form a time-traveling wizardly duo who right wrongs made in the timeline and fight for the forces of good. I don't know how I can improve on that. Now, this is the part where most videos would have some kind of generic closing summary, and I imagine most of the time in the future, I'll be doing exactly that. But Eternal Champions has a sequel with 15 additional characters. Savvy viewers may have noticed I used a lot of details from the updated champion bios for this version of the game instead of the more randomly blue sky optimistic and detail-less versions from the original. I've never played Challenge from the Dark Side, but I'd very much like to. If and when that happens, you can bet I'll bring you guys all the details on that expanded roster, including one of the most notorious fighting game characters of all time. But wait, there's more! In mid-April of this year, Michael Latham apparently announced a familiar-looking game entitled Eternal Successors, along with a few visual mock-ups and concept pieces. So, much like the reveals for Eureka Fighting EX that came shortly after I finished my first video's initial script in March, I'm coming in hot off of announcements for a spiritual successor to this long-neglected franchise. Could my next video do the same for another deadly fighting game? Yeah, I know if I heard about this one coming back, I'd gasp. Whiteout.